All right, why don't we start it, and Brandon's gonna send out another blast, but we're recording it anyway, so we can push it.
Okay, cool.
So.
Have we started?
Yeah, Bob, do you kind of want to, so obviously guys, we do, marketing webinars. Bob is a guy who I met a couple months ago, I think, hit it off. His company is heavily involved in the PR world, also in New York, with, I think I would say an increasing focus on kind of blockchain oriented technologies, definitely fintech being a focus of you guys. Do you want to give kind of just a quick background on Fusion?
Absolutely. Thanks for that intro, and thanks for inviting me to your webinar, and welcome everybody. Yeah, I'm a marketing and PR veteran, worked many years in the field, mostly on the technology side. At Fusion PR, I head up the agency as president, and we focus on a wide range of tech communications and PR programs focused around technology, almost every technology you can imagine, from B2B to consumer. Increasingly, as Chris said, we're doing a lot of blockchain and some cryptocurrency, and we've done a lot of work in related vertical industries, which blockchain should be able to impact. And moving right along, the agenda will be, and Chris, by the way, we're going to be taking questions at the end, correct?
Yeah, we'll do Q&A at the end.
All right. Meanwhile, yell at me if something's unclear or if you want me to focus on something, but I'll just keep on going along here. We'll focus on the state of the buzz in the blockchain space. We'll look at a case study. We'll look at the new rules of PR, because the world of PR has changed dramatically in the past, say, 5 to 10 years. And we'll talk about how to achieve PR and branding success for your blockchain-related venture. So maybe we can get a glimpse of where blockchain is now in terms of the state of the hype and buzz by looking at something that may be familiar. I'll give you a moment to take this in. This is a Gartner hype cycle. Many of you may be familiar with the Gartner Group. They're the leading IT advisory and market research firm in enterprise tech. And this chart, which they issue, I think, once a year, takes a look at technologies and where they are in the adoption curve and the hype curve. And it looks like blockchain now, which is circled there, is in what they call the trough of disillusionment. In other words, it's kind of been overhyped. It's peaked, it's hit the peak of inflated expectations, and now the buzz is declining. And I think probably most people, that wouldn't be too surprising. I mean, in the early years, it rose in line with the cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, which it seems to be kind of forever linked with. And, with rising values in cryptocurrencies, there's great buzz in the blockchain space as well. And guess what? When the values came crashing down, when the regulators started taking a close look, of course, the buzz started to subside. And maybe it's taken a little bit longer than people expected for real-world applications to emerge. The net thing, there's not as much excitement in the blockchain space as there once was. And when I say excitement, I mean, I think people working it are excited about what they're doing, and there are some really cool applications. But I mean primarily in terms of media and analyst coverage. So here's a look at some recent headlines. When I said recent, I mean these are like past week or two. So I mean, the space is still being covered, of course. Maybe with less frequency. I did a search on Meltwater, which is a media database. I think they showed that the number of articles declined dramatically over the past 2 years. But again, it's covered every day. I'm sure you've seen or heard about announcements. Give you a moment to take a look at these. So I wouldn't get too excited if you're a startup. I mean, first of all, these are big media. Big media tend to focus on big brand names. You can see that most of these relate to the big companies, what they're doing. There is an article about philanthropy in Cointelegraph. So we'll explore more of what this means for your space and how to implement programs which help you achieve your goals. We'll start out with a look at a company called BlockSafe Technologies, a company that Fusion PR supported about a year from its launch on up to about 3 or 4 months ago. And they were the first to market with a solution or solutions that protect crypto wallets on the device side and also private blockchains on the enterprise side. And we spoke with them. They were a unit of an established company, so that helped. A company called StrikeFace, which are pretty big players in the cybersecurity space. And we almost immediately ran into challenges because we started work with them right around the time the buzz was turning. and funding was starting to dry up. Regulators were taking a close look at ICOs. That impacted the business plan. We pivoted. We decided to work toward what's called an STO, or secure token offering. I won't get involved, I won't spend too much time on what that means, but it's just a different form of public offering or raising money through cryptocurrency. We had to get creative. We had to rely on thought leadership, a range of proactive campaigns, newsjacking. If we saw a related piece of news, for example, about a hack at a Bitcoin exchange, we would jump in, call reporters, try to get attention for what BlockSafe was doing. We focused on press releases and event campaigns. And over the course of time, we gained coverage in major media and industry publications by drawing attention to vulnerabilities. Now, I spoke a bit about the challenges, but the big opportunity we had and that we really leveraged was calling attention to or deflating a myth that the blockchain is inherently secure. I'll give you a moment to just take a look through this pitch that we sent to reporters. At any rate, I mean, people say the blockchain, one of its benefits is that it's immutable, whatever that means, immutable. I think some people interpret it to mean that it can't be hacked. It's inherently secure. In many ways it is, but the folks at Blockchain working with the PR team at Fusion PR called attention to the fact that while the blockchain itself may be secure, ways of accessing it are not necessarily secure. So for example, if you're working on a handheld device and you're accessing your Bitcoin wallet and a hacker has installed key logging software on the device, they can see everything you're typing. They can get right into your wallet. So this actually caught on, and we got some really nice results. This is just a small sampling. I mean, everything from the Wall Street Journal to Blockchain Reporter and in between. Nice contributed piece in Entrepreneur Magazine by the CEO, George Waller. Contributed piece in Block Tribune, thought leadership piece in Wall Street Journal, etc. And over the course of time, we had briefings and coverage with other publications, NASDAQ's website, MIT Technology Review, NextWeb, VentureBeat, and others. And while I was successful, it wasn't necessarily easy. We had to fight for the coverage, and indeed, it's a street fight for attention these days. As I was saying, PR has changed, the rules of PR have changed. That's because the way we get information has changed. The pace of information has changed. So everybody generally has lots of information coming at them, whether it's through social media, the devices, TV. It's harder than ever to know what to focus on. A lot of us get news through our news feeds, for example, on social media. But in a Facebook news feed, your friends' vacation pictures get mixed up in the blend of content and competing with your launch news, possibly. So it's a real battle. And the upside is, if you think we're slammed as individual users, think of journalists, think of the fire hose of information they have to contend with. And journalists, as a lot, their lives have become more challenging. The shelf life is news is shorter, news cycles are getting shorter, they have to churn out more stories, there's fewer of them out there. And the upshot is they really just don't care. Or it's best to assume when you're approaching them that they don't care, because they're so busy and they get so many press releases and pitches from lots of PR folks, lots of announcements from startups. And the easy thing to do is just ignore it. Again, unless you're a very big brand or it's undeniably ground-shaking news, it's much easier for them to go on to the next story. So the job of the PR team is to find ways to get on their radars and find the angles and approaches that help them understand why what you're doing is worth their attention and worth their readers' attention. So the net of all this is that, again, PR has changed, and what used to work not too long ago is not done so much anymore, especially when you're talking about the realm of the startup, which is typically, doesn't have a large war chest necessarily for PR, and they have to get clever and creative. And, are they going to waste a lot of money and time on a press conference or a press tour when that's not terribly effective? Are you going to bet everything on the big reveal or a big announcement or a big launch, which may or may not get attention? More often than not, it'll be just one blip, and then people move on to the next story. So we think that success means thinking outside the box meaning getting creative, but also thinking outside the block. If you're a blockchain venture, not getting so mired in technology for technology's sake. People are tired of that. You're not going to get a free ride on the buzz of Bitcoin or blockchain anymore. Those days are gone. You have to, I don't know if I'd say downplay the technology, but it shouldn't be front and center or necessarily the main story. If you're in the blockchain sector, often you're talking about applications, it could be underlying technology. But applications, and in that case, you talk about use cases, you talk about benefits, and ultimately you talk about technology, but I don't know if I would necessarily lead with that. So, like I said, you have to get out of the echo chamber and Bitcoin and crypto, sphere. So there's many publications out there. You have the crypto and the blockchain publications, but of course you have, depending on which space you're in, some of these might be important, or I'm sure there's others. You have the vertical industry or vertical trade press, industry media, nonprofits, business press, TV, major media. There's many places to go. The challenge is each has its own rules of engagement. They have their different appetites for what they consider interesting and newsworthy. Typically with the major media, the hurdle is a lot higher to get over. So you've heard about immutable blockchains. I'll talk about the immutable laws of marketing, what can work in this day and age. And I'd say, instead of focusing everything on like the big bang launch and hoping that'll bring you to mass adoption, I think you also have to look at long-term brand building. People buy from companies they know and like. Reporters cover the recognized brands. And it's something that doesn't come overnight, obviously, but it's something that should be in your plan to find a way to invest in the brand over the long term, not a one-shot PR campaign. You have to sharpen your targets. You have to understand who's important for your space in terms of media and influencers, connect with their needs and the needs of their audience, obviously be interesting and relevant. You want to go beyond just getting coverage and also tap direct channels like social media and own content, your website, your blog, of course, influencers, where that makes sense. And a lot of this gets down to understanding how to get through to the user, whether the user is a journalist or an actual end user. And again, it's what's hot, what's trending, what topics do you want to ride on, where do the users live online, where do they get their news and information. You have to learn how to speak their language and tell a clear and compelling story and not emphasizing buzzwords and jargon. You have to speak in their language, and you have to understand what influencers they go to see what's important and what media they turn to read the latest and greatest. Now, this may sound complicated, and I'm not saying it's trivial, and it does require research, or hopefully if you're in the space, you already have some knowledge of who's important in terms of media and influencers. There is many tools for getting a better understanding of where to go for your campaigns. Media databases, influencer databases. I included an example here of BuzzSumo, you've probably heard of. That's a great site to, here's a picture of a screen capture. I typed in blockchain, and this is a look at stories that are trending or content that's trending, has the most shares across different types of networks. And if you're in the actual system, you could go to different screens and, for example, see who are the important influencers, what topics are trending. You could do searches that are a little bit more long tail than just blockchain, or forget blockchain, search in other areas. And there are many tools to help you be smart, again, about what's trending, what's hot, what to focus on, how should you develop your pitches, your content, along, what kind of themes, and, once you have those ready, who should you target with those campaigns? And finally, you're ready for the launch, and you should allow enough time for a launch. This says 60 days. I'd say at least 60 days. Some companies come to us, and they're a week or two away from a major show or launch. And it's like, what can you do for us? And with everything said previously, again, you have to set the stage. You have to develop your content, your messages, your story. You have to make sure you're really ready for this. You have to do your homework. and make sure you have some kind of campaign or news that will interest the intended audience. So typically that means over 60 days, in the first weeks, taking time to get the toolkit together. That means crafting the messages that support the story, the types of phrases and words that you use in your pitches, making sure you are building your toolkit, whether it's a press release, a Q&A, different types of materials, a PowerPoint, a demo of some kind of solution. PR assets, that generally means things like, well, of course, hard use, but also third-party validation. If you have actual users who have adopted your solution, or influencers or analysts that can validate it, and who will speak to the media, all the better. Then you want to get out there with your early campaigns and drive early buzz, market seeding, getting out to the social networks, teasing at the news if you're going to be going out with some kind of hard news announcement. And then you plan toward the actual launch, whether it's an event, whether it's pitching a press release, there's some preparation that goes into that. That typically means approaching reporters in advance. As we say, under embargo, we share the news with them before it's ready to go out so they can start working on their stories and they feel like you kind of love them, and they're happy to get the information earlier. Hopefully it's something that they're really interested in. And then you're off to the races. And you can read much more in the following links. We have a few interesting blog posts, as well as a link to an interview that George Chernowski, our CEO, did for No CMO about blockchain and crypto. You can contact me at the following number and email. And thank you for attending. And Chris, now I'll hand the microphone back to you.
Yeah, Bob, thanks for this. This is really great. I particularly liked the last part there with BuzzSumo. I think, it's a tool that we use that's very easy to kind of learn. And I think it's good for people to use, regardless of industry, basically, but to get an idea of what's out there and what kind of messaging people are using. And Bob, you'll send this, just so everybody knows, we'll send out the slides afterwards, so you don't have to worry about getting down the links or anything. But so now we're going to do Q&A for Bob, and if anybody has comments, feel free to chime in when you get the chance.
And people can find that interview that he mentioned everywhere. It's on all platforms, all podcast platforms as well. Or if you go to youdon'tneedacmo.com/podcast, it is also there, as well as the links.
Great. Well, hopefully we didn't put everybody to sleep. And I don't know question.
This was definitely more informational than me trying to understand it. I liked how all the information was laid out.
Well, this is a little bit more Cliff Notes than Jordan's. Jordan's was like a long form version, I think.
Well, that's good for people, actually, because then they can go and get that version of it, or they can get the more concise here. So it's good that – and you went into different details that we didn't touch on as well, obviously, with the entire business side of it.
Absolutely. As I remember, that was more about kind of like big picture and theory rather than practical. How do we,
Exactly. This is the application.
Correct. Yes.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So say I'm, a blockchain-based business, and like you said, you mentioned, it's a buzzword. Am I worried about trying to change people's opinion of what blockchain is, or should I just focus on, exactly what I do for my company?
I think, unless there's kind of like a rule of PR that if you think you're going to get an objection, more than half the time you should preempt it. So if there's any reason to think that whoever you're talking to might have an issue with that, it's best to mention it up front that it is blockchain based. Otherwise, I wouldn't start with it. I would mention it probably at some point, because if you need a blockchain, there's no getting around that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I don't know if I would lead with that per se.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Got it. I have a question. Is there any kind of like jargon or other term? Let's say, I have blockchain in my product in some sense or in some capacity it's related. Is there any other way I can describe it without talking about blockchain?
Yeah, that's a good point. Over the years, people have tried to find a way to kind of maybe shift attention by talking attention not about blockchain. So something you may hear about is DLT, distributed ledger technology. I think that's used.
Right, that's it, yeah.
private blockchain, although that has the word blockchain in it. There's other words. ReFi is another one. I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but yeah, there's a whole language that kind of evolved as an offshoot of blockchain and crypto.
Got it.
I guess if you want it to be more kind of buttoned down, corporate ready, you want to
Stealthy.
you want to dress it up a little bit and maybe use some different ways of describing it, different words.
Got it. What about kind of regionally? Yeah, I know you guys do, mostly work with U.S. companies, but are there any trends, like is Europe per se farther back in terms of how they've developed talking about blockchain? Like, what are the differences internationally?
No, I would say Europe is definitely, in fact, some parts of Europe. We did some work in Ireland, and it's maybe been a little easier in Europe from a regulation standpoint, surprisingly, because they're tough in other areas. But I'd say it's still pretty big in Europe for sure. And we've done work in Europe. Definitely, it's not just U.S. where we work.
Hi guys, I'm Rahul. I'm a friend of Chris. I had a question.
Sure, please.
A suggestion to stop double spending in blockchain, because that's quite an important point, right? So.
Well, that's one of the benefits of blockchain, right? That you don't double spend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what would be the process to stop double spending on blockchain?
That's a good question. It's maybe a bit too technical for me.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I thought, I thought that was one of the benefits of blockchain, is that it avoids double spend.
How do you explain? I mean, in general, how would you explain? Like, let's say you were publishing something in a publication that has no, where you could tell the audience is not going to know, like, what distributed ledger technology is. What's the simplest way in which you would explain some of the components of the technology?
Just as a distributed kind of decentralized network. I would probably use database or ledger. It's hard to get around those words. The fact that it's pretty locked down. Once you make changes, they're pretty much committed to the system. Part of the challenge, I think, is that people got a little carried away and they got caught up in, some things that may or may not be important. The fact that the blockchain took control from government, from big business, and now suddenly it's in the hands of the people. It's decentralized. You don't need the middleman anymore necessarily. And people thought it would change the world. And maybe it will eventually, but I think that's part of the problem, is that promise got ahead of reality. Makes sense.
And how do you see blockchain to grow as a market, or as a ecosystem itself?
It's a good question. I think as the bigger players continue to support it, and I showed you a bunch of announcements from some big companies, of course, Facebook and others. I think I think we need another killer application beyond cryptocurrency, and I think some thought it would be records management, record keeping. There are some challenges in the technology in that it may not be as scalable or as fast as other technologies when it comes to, for example, high-speed databases or high-frequency transactions. That has to be overcome. We had one client called Solana that was working hard on a very, very scalable blockchain that was extremely fast. So there are some technical issues. I think it's also, again, finding something that can be adopted mainstream. Right now, I don't know if you've tried to do any business with blockchain. Often that means, of course, currency, and it's just still a nightmare. I mean, the user experience is terrible. So I think they have to work on improving the user's experience. I think more real-world applications have to emerge. We need more killer applications. And I think that'll go a long way.
Got it.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions and participating.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Rahul.
Anything else, or you think we're good here? Should we wait? I'm not in any rush, but I just.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. You guys work with, obviously larger, a variety of, I guess, sizes of companies. Do you see, are there any like who are the big players that are getting into blockchain?
I don't know if I could share their name or the news yet, but there's a major telecom network which is working on a 5G exchange, spectrum exchange using blockchain. And we'll probably be supporting them. How many telecom companies are there? So you could, you can narrow down a list, but, it's probably one of the 5 most recognizable names.
Got it. I feel like we've been hearing that like kind of stuff for years, with a lot of companies, and it seems like it doesn't materialize. Like I remember hearing something about like Microsoft doing a currency or something.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating. I mean, that's probably why some of the buzz has subsided, because it's I think if you were asked most people, they'd say it hasn't delivered on its promise. Maybe it was overpromised and there was too much expectation.
Right.
But I think the important thing is there's definitely a loyal group, and I think most recognize that it's going to be very important technology. And I think over time it'll definitely be adopted, and we'll see some success for it. It's just more of kind of long-term thing than, tomorrow or next week or next year.
Got it. And another thing is, how do you judge the effectiveness of a PR campaign for a blockchain company? Because in a lot of situations, like the product isn't, it either hasn't been released or it's not something that's usable by consumers. Like, how would you judge the success of a campaign?
That's a good question. I kind of think back to an analogy, and we got involved in some Kickstarter campaigns, and obviously companies that are doing Kickstarter are not well funded. I mean, they try to raise money. So what do you do with a company that's just trying to raise funds on Kickstarter? And you take it in stages. For example, if they're very early and they're raising money through some kind of token offering, you focus on that. And there's a very dedicated group of folks who follow developments there. You're not going to get major media coverage on, something that's not translated to reality yet. But there's different things at different times. I mean, as you get closer to market readiness, that's when you could probably start going out to the media, especially when you have some kind of validation, whether it's beta users or something to point to show that people are starting to use this, and it's going to be interesting. And over time, I mean, the success is really based on what the company needs, whether they're trying to build market share, drive user acquisition. I mean, we always sit down with clients at the beginning of an engagement to understand what they're looking at, short-term, mid-term, long-term, and then we kind of fine-tune programs to help meet those goals at every step of the way.
Got
it. I mean, the easiest thing to look at is media coverage, and we most certainly do look at that. And there's some very sophisticated systems these days, like I mentioned Meltwater earlier. And Meltwater and there's other similar systems that get very scientific about PR results, and they can do everything from look at share of voice for a brand, share of voice for a topic, share of conversation, to say nothing of knowing the audience, the reach, how many engagements, how many likes, was there some inbound web traffic from the coverage. So you can get pretty scientific, and of course, you pay attention to those metrics and how to fine-tune your programs to do even better.
Got it. Now, what other tools do you guys use? I guess, do you use Cision? Like what tools are people?
Cision for sure we have used. We've used almost all of them over the years. It was MyBDinfo at one point we used. Then there's social media dashboards. Hootsuite, of course, has its own social media analytics. Each platform has its own analytics. Then Google Trends, Keyword Planner. Facebook has some tools. So it really depends on what we're working with.
Got it. Now, I remember Jordan talking about this on the podcast, but social media plays a pretty big role in what you guys do.
Absolutely. I mean, it's part of the communications arsenal these days. It's hard to ignore it. I think it's a mistake to ignore it. The main question is, do you give it to a dedicated digital team, or do you give it to most PR agencies are working with social media these days, and they're also working with content marketing. That's something we certainly handle. Those two things, plus influencer marketing. As fewer people, or it gets harder to interest major media get earned media coverage. I mean, the other side of that is it's easier to take your message direct to your target audience if you're smart about it. And typically, I think, as you know, it takes time to build a following. So it's not going to happen overnight. But if you're smart about how you go out there and you're interesting and you use your channels together and you repurpose content across channels and you listen as well as broadcast information and engage, and over time you'll build your own media, your earned media, and even paid media. All those things will grow.
What are in the blockchain space, what are the big influencers? Like, what are the biggest publications that you've seen the most success with?
I'd say there's Cointelegraph, Block Tribune, Blockchain Reporter, Bitcoin Magazine, CoinDesk are some of them. You have podcasts like Cryptoverse, the Blockchain Show, and you have like quite a few influencers who we reach out to pretty regularly. Crypto Bobby, who is the host and creator of the Crypto Bobby Show. A lot of folks like that who are out there. Don Tapscott, he's an author, and he wrote a book about the blockchain. He's head of Blockchain Research Institute. Industry analysts are important for blockchain too.
Got it. Cool. So everybody, we'll send this out afterwards, and yeah, I think we're gonna do a few more of these. So
Love to.
very helpful. Thanks for coming, Bob.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.